Right now, Taiwan is practicing for war. The island just finished its largest military exercises in history. 22,000 people preparing for a potential Chinese invasion. And here's the wild part. This entire crisis centers on a historical claim that China has controlled Taiwan since ancient times. But when I started digging into what historians actually say about this, well, let's just say the story is a lot more complicated than either side wants you to believe. Beijing points to 4 main historical periods as evidence they've always controlled Taiwan. Ancient expeditions from 230, Sui Dynasty contact in the 1600s, Yuan Dynasty administration in the 1290s, and Qing Dynasty rule from 1683 to 1895. So I spent weeks reading academic papers and checking sources. What I found isn't a simple story of propaganda versus facts. It's something much more interesting. Let me walk you through what scholars actually agree on, what they're still debating, and why it matters for understanding today's crisis. So, China says that in 230, Chinese texts describe expeditions to an island called Yizu, which they identify as Taiwan. Now, here's what we can actually verify. The primary source is Chen Shu's Record of the Three Kingdoms, written around 290. It describes expeditions by Sun Quan that brought back thousands of people from this mysterious island. But here's where it gets interesting. According to the Cambridge History of China, and I'm quoting here, some scholars have identified this island as Taiwan, while others do not. We're talking about events from 1800 years ago, described in texts written decades later, using geographic terms that ancient Chinese applied pretty loosely to various islands. Even if these expeditions did reach Taiwan, historians agree that nothing permanent came of these contacts. No administration, no lasting presence, no follow-up. So, bottom line, there might have been early Chinese contact with Taiwan, but the identification is disputed and the impact was minimal. Think of it like Vikings reaching North America centuries before Columbus. Interesting historically? Absolutely, but not really establishing territorial control. Next up, Beijing argues the Sui dynasty sent 3 successful expeditions to Ryukyu in 607, 608 and 610. But here's the problem. Nobody's quite sure what Ryukyu actually refers to. According to scholar Chang Bu, and I'm quoting again, some scholars believe that the record of Ryukyu referred to the Ryukyu island near Taiwan, while some say it was a reference to what are now the Ryukyu Islands, and others suggest it was a general term referring to islands in the East China Sea and nearby waters. Here's a fascinating detail though. Zhu Quan, the leader of the first Sui expeditions to Ryukyu, originally wrote the name with the characters meaning flowing dragon, because the shape of the island reminded him of a dragon floating on the sea. While Okinawa is a long and thin island that later commentators also associated with a dragon, Taiwan is an oval-shaped island rather than dragon-shaped. So here's where we land. The Sui expeditions definitely happened, but we can't even be sure where they went, let alone whether they established any lasting control. Now the third piece of evidence is where things get really interesting. Beijing says the Yuan dynasty established administrative control in the 1290s. But when you dig into the records, well, this is actually kind of embarrassing for territorial claims. In 1292, Kublai Khan sent officials to the Ryukyu kingdom to demand its loyalty. But plot twist, the officials ended up in Taiwan and mistook it for Ryukyu. Think about that for a moment. These weren't explorers discovering new lands. They were officials who got completely lost, trying to reach a different island entirely. When they arrived in Taiwan, they couldn't communicate with the indigenous people. After 3 soldiers were killed, the delegation immediately retreated. As Taiwanese scholar Professor Lai Fu-shun points out, this actually demonstrates that Taiwan and China were separate entities. How can getting lost, landing in the wrong place, losing soldiers and immediately fleeing constitute evidence of territorial control? They tried again in 1297, but once again, no lasting administrative presence was established. Now we get to Beijing's strongest historical argument, the Qing Dynasty period. And honestly, this one is genuinely complex. In 1683, Qing forces defeated the Ming loyalist Zheng regime and annexed Taiwan. For 212 years until 1895, there was a real Chinese administrative control over parts of Taiwan. But, and this is a big but, even this period wasn't what modern territorial claims suggest. MIT's Emma Tang, one of the world's leading Taiwan historians, puts it perfectly. Taiwan was terra incognita for the better part of Chinese history. Even during the Qing period, until 300 years ago, the Chinese considered Taiwan a land beyond the seas, a ball of mud inhabited by naked and tattooed savages. Here's what the evidence shows. The Qing established formal boundary systems with stone markers separating Han settler areas from indigenous territories. This was gradual expansion over centuries, not immediate island-wide control. And here's a revealing moment from 1874. When Japan invaded southern Taiwan, the Qing had to pay indemnity for Japanese withdrawal, because Japan argued these areas weren't under effective Chinese control. If the Qing really controlled all of Taiwan, why couldn't they defend it without paying Japan to leave? The story ends in 1895 when, after losing the First Sino-Japanese War, the Qing ceded Taiwan to Japan in the Treaty of Shimonoseki. Taiwan then spent 50 years under comprehensive Japanese administration. Now, here's what gets lost in modern political arguments. By the end of Qing rule in 1895, Taiwan's ethnic Han population had increased by over 2 million. Real communities, real families, real economic and cultural development happened during the Qing period. But here's the crucial point. The People's Republic of China, government making territorial claims today, was established in 1949. It has never controlled Taiwan for even a single day. Here's what actually happened after World War II. Taiwan was transferred to the Republic of China. When the Chinese Civil War ended in 1949, the ROC government relocated to Taiwan, while the PRC took control of mainland China. We've had two separate governments ever since. So, where does this leave us? Here's what historians across the political spectrum actually agree on. Indigenous Austronesian peoples inhabited Taiwan for thousands of years before any Chinese contact. Early Chinese contacts were brief and didn't establish lasting control. Yuan Dynasty expeditions failed completely. Qing Dynasty exercised real but geographically limited control for over 2 centuries. Japanese period involved comprehensive island-wide administration. Post-1949 division created genuinely separate political systems. And here's what they're still debating. Whether ancient expeditions actually reached Taiwan, how to interpret the extent and significance of Qing control, legal implications of World War II territorial transfers. When you examine the historical evidence objectively, you don't find a simple story of Taiwan has always been Chinese or Taiwan was never Chinese. You find something more complex, an island with indigenous peoples, gradual Chinese settlement during one particular dynasty, comprehensive Japanese modernization, and then post-war division that continues today. The current crisis isn't really about ancient history. It's about how modern governments use selective historical narratives to justify contemporary political goals. Understanding Taiwan's real history helps us see beyond the political talking points. Whether you support unification, independence, or maintaining the status quo, the historical record shows that Taiwan's relationship with China has been much more complicated, contested, and recent than either side usually admits. The next time you hear claims about ancient territorial rights, remember, good history is messy, complicated, and full of uncertainty. It's the simple, confident, historical claims you should probably question. What do you think? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more fact-checking on the claims driving today's headlines.